You were never the light, Serafina. You were merely the shadow that made my brilliance tolerable. Those words didn't just break my heart, they incinerated my very soul. 7 seconds. That was all it took for my world to collapse. 7 seconds of absolute silence in the grand cathedral of Aethelgard as Prince Cassius, the man I had bled for, fought for, and loved for a decade, held my hand not to kiss it, but to crush the magic right out of my marrow. The crowd, the same people who had cheered my name as the goddess of the dawn just an hour ago, gasped in a collective, sickening symphony of betrayal. I, Cassius Valeries, Crown Prince of Aethelgard, hereby reject the bond with Serafina Thorn. His voice boomed, amplified by the high vaulted ceilings. It was cold. It was surgical. A tainted bloodline has no place on the throne. You are a fraud, a hollow vessel masquerading as divinity. You are nothing but damaged goods. The word damaged hit me harder than the physical blow that followed. Cassius didn't just stop at words. He raised his gauntleted hand, glowing with the very solar flame I had helped him master, and plunged it into my chest. Not to kill me, that would have been a mercy. He reached for the core of my power, the shimmering essence of light that defined my existence, and ripped it out. The agony was a white-hot scream that died in my throat. I fell to the cold marble floor, my vision splintering into 1,000 jagged pieces. Through the haze of pain I saw her, Lady Alara. She was everything I was, pure-blooded, delicate, and wearing a smile that was sharper than any blade. Cassius stepped over my shivering form, reaching for her hand with the same tenderness he had promised me only last night. "Claim your true queen," someone shouted from the pews. And they did. That was 3 hours ago. Now I am dying. The rejection of a soul bond is a slow poison. It's not just the heart that stops, the body begins to consume itself, desperate for the connection that was violently severed. I dragged myself through the mud of the outer slums, my silk gown tattered and soaked in my own copper-tasting blood. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The healers in the capital had turned their backs, the priests had spit on my shadow. But I wasn't ready to fade into a footnote in Cassius's history. If the light had abandoned me, then I would seek the dark. If the heavens wanted me to kneel in the dirt, I would dig until I found the gates of hell. I reached the edge of the frozen abyss, the jagged scar in the earth where the sun never reached. This was the prison of the forbidden king, Silas the Devourer. They said he was a monster. They said he had teeth made of midnight and a heart of obsidian. I stood at the precipice, coughing up a fresh spray of blood that stained the snow like a macabre painting. My wolf, the spirit of my inner power, was a whimpering, dying thing in the back of my mind. "Silas," I screamed into the void, my voice cracking. "I don't offer you my prayer. I offer you my vengeance. Take my blood, take what's left of this broken life, and let me see them burn." I didn't wait for an answer. I jumped. The fall felt like an eternity of silence. Gravity was a cruel lover, tugging at my broken ribcage until my lungs finally collapsed into the dark. I expected the bone-shattering impact of rock. I expected the cold embrace of a grave. Instead, I hit something that felt like living shadow. The air in the abyss was cold, it was thick, smelling of ancient ozone, scorched earth, and something dangerously masculine, the scent of rain on hot pavement, mixed with crushed cedar. A bird with clipped wings, a voice vibrated through the floor beneath me. It wasn't a human voice. It was a tectonic shift, a low-frequency growl that rattled the very marrow of my shattered spine. "And she smells of solar flame." How offensive. I tried to push myself up, my palms slipping on smooth black obsidian. My vision was a blurred mess of gray and violet. Ahead of me, a pair of eyes ignited. They weren't eyes, they were twin dying suns, glowing with a predatory, molten amethyst light. Silas the Devourer, the forbidden king of the Midnight Realm. He wasn't the mindless beast the priests described in their frightened Sunday sermons. He sat upon a throne of jagged dragon glass, his massive frame draped in shadows that seemed to breathe. Heavy, glowing manacles forged from the soul iron of 1,000 martyrs bound his wrists to the stone, the chains humming with a spersevis golden light. "I am Seraphina," I coughed, the copper tang of blood flooding my mouth again. "I know who you are, Seraphina Thorn," Silas murmured. He leaned forward, the movement causing the massive chains to shriek in protest. His face was a masterpiece of lethal beauty features carved from the darkest nightmares, skin the color of twilight, and a mouth that looked like it had never known a kind word. "I watched your little coronation, or rather, the comedy of your execution. Tell me, does the prince's brand still burn? I can smell your flesh cooking from here." The mention of Cassius was a hot needle in my brain. I clutched my chest where the invisible threads of the mate bond were fraying into nothing. The rejection was eating me. I was a hollowed-out star, collapsing inward. "He took everything," I whispered, my voice a jagged shard. "My light, my crown, my honor." He called me damaged goods. Silas laughed. It was a dark, melodic sound that sent a shiver of pure electricity down my arms. He rose, the chains straining until the obsidian floor cracked beneath his feet. Despite the bindings, he moved with the lethal grace of a panther. Damaged? No. He was suddenly there, looming over me, a god of ruin. He knelt, his presence so overwhelming that my wolf, what was left of her, actually tried to howl in submission. "He didn't just reject you, little bird. He used you as a battery for 10 years to fuel his own ascension, and when your core began to crystallize, he discarded the shell so he wouldn't have to witness the explosion." My heart stuttered. "What?" "The solar flame he carries. Half of it is yours. Stolen. Grafted into his soul like a parasite." Silas leaned in, his nose brushing the pulse point on my neck. His breath was warm, smelling of dark magic and old secrets. "And now here you are, offering your dying embers to the very monster he fears most." "Mark me," I blurted out, the words born of pure, unadulterated spite. "If I am to burn, I want to be the fire that consumes Aethelgard. Mark me, Silas. Make me your weapon. I will give you my soul, my blood. Anything, just give me the power to make him regret the day he was born." Silas's amethyst eyes darkened until they were almost black. He reached out, his long, scarred fingers wrapping around my throat. Not to choke, but to possess. His thumb traced the jagged scar where Cassius had ripped out my magic. "You want revenge?" he whispered, his lips inches from mine. "Revenge is a heavy crown, Seraphina. It will turn your heart to stone and your blood to ink. You will never be a lady again. You will be a queen of ash. I've already been a saint, and it got me a grave," I spat, meeting his gaze with every ounce of fury I had left. "Let me be a demon." Silas's smile was a promise of total devastation. He leaned down, his teeth sharp, lethal, grazing the tender skin of my collarbone. 3 days, he murmured against my skin, his touch sending a terrifying jolt of pleasure through the pain. 3 days to see if your spirit is as strong as your tongue. If you survive the darkness I pour into you, I will not only mark you. I will give you a howl that will bring the heavens crashing down on your prince's head. He struck. His fangs didn't just pierce my skin, they pierced my reality. A torrent of cold, black power flooded my veins, clashing with the dying solar light in a cataclysmic battle. I threw my head back, my silent scream finally finding a voice, a raw, guttural roar that echoed through the abyss, shattering the obsidian pillars around us. Inside me, the wolf didn't just wake up. She turned black. The darkness didn't just fill my veins, it rewrote my DNA. For 72 hours, I was a storm trapped in a glass jar. Silas had dropped me into the pool of veils, a subterranean lake of liquefied shadow that sat at the very heart of the abyss. It wasn't water. It was the concentrated essence of every nightmare the world had ever forgotten. Every time I tried to breathe, the shadowing flooded my lungs, burning away the lingering, pathetic traces of Cassius's solar light. It felt like being flayed alive, one cell at a time. "Don't fight the drowning, Seraphina." Silas's voice drifted from the obsidian shore, cool and rhythmic, a haunting anchor in my sea of agony. "The light taught you to resist the dark. I am teaching you to be the dark. Surrender the saint, or the demon will have nothing to inhabit. I clawed at the surface, my fingernails tearing against the viscous liquid. My vision was a kaleidoscope of violet fire and black static. Through the haze I saw him. Silas sat on the edge of the pool, one leg hooked over the other, watching my struggle with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a dying star. But then, the mate bond rejection spiked. Miles above, in the gilded halls of Aethelgard, Cassius must have been touching her. Ilara? I felt the phantom sensation of his fingers that had once traced my jaw and outracing hers. A wave of nauseating, secondhand pleasure washed through the bond, followed by a searing pain in my chest that felt like a hot iron being twisted in my heart. I let out a strangled, wet sob sinking beneath the black surface. I can't. It hurts too much. Suddenly a hand massive, scarred, and radiating a heat that put the sun to shame dived into the shadows and hauled me upward by the hair. Silas didn't pull me to the shore. He dragged my shivering, naked body against his chest right there in the shallows. The contrast was a shock to my system, the freezing liquid of the pool and the furnace-like intensity of his skin. "Look at me," he commanded, his thumb hooking under my chin and forcing my head back. My eyes snapped open. They weren't blue anymore. I could feel the iris bleeding into a deep, bruised amethyst mirroring his own. "He is kissing her right now, isn't he?" Silas whispered, his face inches from mine. His storm cloud eyes were predatory, reading the flickering agony in my expression. "You can feel his satisfaction. You can feel the ghost of his mark fading from your skin while he prepares to brand another." "Stop," I gasped, clutching at his forearms. His muscles were like braided steel beneath my touch. "Make it stop. There is only one way to silence the ghost of a traitor," Silas growled. He brought his wrist to his mouth and bit down. The sound of tearing flesh was sharp in the silent cavern. He pressed the wound to my lips. "Drink. Take the blood of the king you were taught to fear. Sever the thread yourself." I didn't hesitate. I was a starving creature, and he was a feast of forbidden power. His blood tasted of iron, ancient smoke, and starlight. The moment it hit my tongue, the phantom connection to Cassius didn't just fade, it was vaporized. A wall of black flame erupted in my mind, incinerating the golden threads of the old bond until there was nothing left but ash. I arched my back, a guttural sound ripping from my throat. "That's it," Silas murmured, his hand sliding down to the small of my back, holding me steady as the power surged through me. "Kill the girl. Let the queen rise." Inside me, the wolf finally stopped whimpering. She stood up. She grew. Her fur, once the color of a summer dawn, turned the shade of a moonless midnight, tipped with silver frost. She threw her head back in the mental landscape and let out a roar that wasn't a cry for help, it was a declaration of war. I pushed away from Silas, standing on my own 2 feet in the dark water. I felt balanced, heavy with a power that didn't ask for permission. I walked out of the pool, the shadow liquid sliding off my skin like silk. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I reached for the air, and instead of the faint, flickering sparks of the solar flame, a wreath of violet-black fire ignited around my crown. The dark corona, Silas observed, rising to his full, intimidating height. He looked at me not as a victim, but as a masterpiece. The rarest manifestation of the void. "You didn't just survive, Seraphina. You conquered." "What is the date?" I asked, my voice vibrating with a new, dangerous resonance. "The new moon," Silas replied, a dark smirk tugging at his lips. "The night of the solar wedding. Your prince is standing at the altar as we speak, waiting to be crowned High King alongside his pure-blooded bride." I closed my eyes, feeling the vibration of the earth. I could hear the distant bells of the capital, miles above. They sounded like a funeral toll. I looked at Silas. I looked at the manacles still binding his wrist chains that I now realized were made of the same solar light that had once been mine. "You gave me your blood," I said, walking toward him. My steps left scorched footprints on the obsidian. "Now let me give you your freedom. We have a wedding to crash." I didn't use a blade. I didn't use a spell. I simply reached out and touched the soul iron chains. My dark fire surged, turning the golden light to black brittle glass. With a sound like a mountain cracking, the manacles shattered. Silas let out a breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated release. He stretched his massive wings, shadows unfurling like tattered silk that filled the entire cavern. He looked down at me, his amethyst eyes burning with a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. The world is going to scream when they see what we've become, little bird. Let them, I replied, my wolf howling for the first time, a sound so loud it caused the ceiling of the abyss to crack, letting in the first jagged streak of moonlight. I want them to hear me coming. Surface world smelled of lies and expensive jasmine. We emerged from the mouth of the abyss not as fugitives, but as a storm front. The night air of the capital was warm, thick with the scent of celebration. Fireworks, the golden, sputtering kind that Cassius loved because they reminded everyone of his stolen solar flame, streaked across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of arrogant amber. They are celebrating a funeral, Silas murmured, standing beside me in the shadows of the whispering woods. He had shifted his form slightly, his massive wings tucked into a cloak of living darkness, though he still stood a head taller than any mortal man. Your funeral, Seraphina, and their own. I didn't look at the fireworks. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The black-violet fire of the dark corona hummed beneath my skin, a silent, hungry beast. Let them have their music, I said, my voice as cold as the obsidian floor of the abyss. I want to see the moment the music stops. We didn't storm the palace. Not yet. I wanted the slow burn. I wanted to walk through the front gates and watch them realize that the girl they had trampled into the mud had returned as a goddess of ruin. Silas draped a necklace of raw shadow pearls around my neck. As they touched my skin, they shimmered, weaving a glamour that hid my silver markings but couldn't quite mask the predatory lethalness of my gaze. Go, he whispered, his lips brushing my temple, a touch that felt like a brand. Show them the damaged goods they discarded. I will be in the shadows, waiting to catch the ashes. The grand ballroom of the solar palace was a cathedral of excess. Gold leaf covered every pillar, and the nobility of Aethel guard swirled in silken lace, sipping wine that cost more than a commoner's life. At the far end, on a dais of pure quartz, sat Cassius and Delara. He looked magnificent in his white and gold military regalia, the stolen light radiating from him in a warm, comforting glow. Alara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, wearing the Thorn family tiara, mighty aura. I pushed through the heavy oak doors. I didn't announce myself. I simply walked into the room. The conversation didn't die instantly. It trickled away, starting from the perimeter and moving inward like an ink stain on a white cloth. People turned, drawn by the sheer gravitational weight of my presence. I was wearing a gown of midnight silk that seemed to absorb the light from the chandeliers. My hair, once pale gold, was now a deep, metallic silver that cascaded down my back like a waterfall of starlight. Who is that? I heard a duchess whisper. A foreign princess, she looks dangerous. I walked straight toward the dais. Every step was a rhythmic strike of a war drum in my head. Cassius was laughing at something a courtier said when his eyes finally found me. The laughter didn't just stop, it choked in his throat. He stood up, his hand reflexively going to the hilt of his sword. Seraphina? His voice was a strangled rasp. Beside him, Delara blanched, her grip tightening on his arm. Impossible. You died in the outer slums. The healers said your bond was completely severed. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, Alara, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. I stopped 10 paces from the dais, my head tilted at a defiant angle. Though I must thank you. The mud of the slums is much more grounding than the silk of this palace. You shouldn't be here, Cassius snarled, though I could see the slight tremor in his fingers. The stolen light within him flickered, reacting to the void within me. You are a traitor to the crown, a tainted bloodline that was rightfully purged. Purged, I laughed, a sharp, crystalline sound that made the wine glasses on the nearby tables vibrate. You didn't purge me, Cassius. You liberated me. I took another step forward. The air around me began to drop in temperature. Frost started to creep across the gold-leafed floor, turning the warm ballroom into a winter tomb. Guards, Elara shrieked. Seize her, Shess practicing dark arts. A dozen solar knights stepped forward, their swords glowing with artificial light. They surrounded me, their expressions a mix of duty and sheer terror. I warned, my amethyst eyes igniting with the dark corona. Seraphina, stop this madness, Cassius commanded, stepping down from the dais. He tried to use his alpha voice, the one that used to make me kneel. You are weak. You are broken. Whatever trickery you found in the dark won't save you from the solar flame. You keep using that word, I murmured, my black fire beginning to lick at my fingertips. Weak. Let's test that theory, shall we? I didn't lunge. I didn't strike. I simply opened my soul. The dark corona erupted from me in a silent, violent shockwave. It didn't burn, it consumed. Every candle, every chandelier, every magical lightstone in the room was snuffed out in a heartbeat. The grand ballroom was plunged into a darkness so absolute that people began to scream in primal panic. But I wasn't dark. I stood in the center of the void, glowing with a terrifying violet-black radiance. The silver markings on my skin flared through the midnight silk, pulsing with the rhythm of my black wolf's heart. I moved toward Cassius through the dark. He stumbled back, his hands glowing with a pathetic, sputtering gold light that couldn't even illuminate his own feet. Where is your son now, Prince? I whispered, my voice echoing from the walls as if 1,000 wolves were speaking at once. I reached out and grabbed his throat. The stolen light within him screamed in protest, but my darkness was a predator that had finally found its prey. I felt the familiar heat of my own stolen magic inside him, and for the first time I pushed back. Cassius fell to his knees, his eyes wide with a realization that came too late. He looked at the girl he had called damaged goods, and for the first time in his life, he saw the face of the woman who was going to end him. From the shadows behind the dais, a pair of amethyst eyes ignited. Silas was watching. The wedding isn't until tomorrow, Cassius, I said, leaning down so only he could hear me. But I think your reign just ended tonight. I released him, and as the darkness began to recede, leaving a room full of weeping, terrified nobles, I turned my back on the throne. See you at the altar, I said. And then, I vanished into the night, leaving the taste of ash in the prince's mouth. The bells of Aethelgard didn't ring for a wedding, they tolled for a funeral. The sun god's cathedral was a masterpiece of arrogance, a sprawling fortress of white marble and stained glass designed to capture every stray beam of sunlight and concentrate it upon the altar. Today, it was packed with the elite of the empire, their faces tight with a fragile veneer of celebration that couldn't quite mask the scent of sweat and fear. Last night's incident had been officially dismissed by the Royal Council as a manifestation of chaotic residue, a trick of the mind played by a vengeful ghost. But as Cassius stood at the altar, his hands were trembling beneath his silk gloves. I watched him from the shadows of the high rafters, crouched like a gargoyle of obsidian and silver. Beside me, the air shimmered, and Silas leaned against a marble pillar, his presence a silent, suffocating weight. He looks pale, Silas remarked, his voice a low vibration that only I could hear. A king who fears his own shadow is already halfway to the guillotine. He doesn't fear his shadow, Silas, I whispered, watching Elara glide down the aisle in a dress made of literal gold thread. He fears the truth that lives inside it. The high priest raised his golden staff, his voice booming through the hallowed space. We gather today to witness the union of light and purity, to see the solar flame pass to a new generation, untainted and divine. The word untainted was the final spark in my powder keg. As Cassius reached for the crown, the thorn crown, my birthright, I didn't wait for the cue. I let out a whistle, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the choirs chanting like a razor. Crash. The massive rose window at the front of the cathedral exploded inward in a rain of crystalline fire. But it wasn't a bird that flew through the debris. It was a wolf the size of a warhorse made of churning, violet-black smoke and solidified rage. I sat upon the wolf's back, my silver hair whipping behind me like a comet's tail. We landed on the altar with a bone-jarring thud shattering the sacred marble floor. The screaming began instantly. "The damaged goods has returned for her crown." "Cassius," I said, my voice amplified by the void echoing with a haunting, metallic resonance. "Guard the king," the high priest shrieked, but as the solar knights rushed forward, a shadow far greater than mine eclipsed the sun. Above the cathedral, the sky turned the color of a bruised lung. A massive, leathery wing swept across the roof, and the sound of scales scraping against stone made the bravest men drop their swords. Silas wasn't hiding anymore. The Forbidden King was circling the spire, a living nightmare carved from the dark. "Stay back," Cassius roared, his face contorted in a mask of desperation. He grabbed Alara, using her almost as a shield. "She is a demon. She has sold her soul to the abyss." "I didn't sell it, Cassius," I said, sliding off the shadow wolf's back. I walked toward him, each step leaving a charred, glowing footprint on the white altar cloth. "I simply reclaimed the part you tried to kill. Tell them, Prince. Tell them why you needed my magic for 10 years. Tell them what happens to a solar king when his battery runs dry." "Silence," he screamed, thrusting his hand forward. A bolt of golden fire shot toward me, the magic he had stolen from my chest. I didn't dodge. I didn't blink. I raised my hand, and the dark corona flared. The black fire swallowed his golden bolt whole, devouring the energy as if it were nothing more than a snack. "Is that all?" I mocked, stepping into his personal space. The temperature around us plummeted until Alara's breath hitched in frozen gasps. "You've grown weak, Cassius. Stolen magic is like a borrowed coat, it never quite fits right, does it?" I grabbed his wrist, and the contact was electric. I didn't pull away, I pushed my consciousness into him, forcing the truth to the surface. In the minds of everyone present, a vision erupted, a memory forced into their collective psyche by my new power. They saw a young Cassius crying in a dark room, his veins turning black because he was born without a spark. They saw the night he drugged me, the night he used a forbidden ritual to graft my soul to his own, turning me into a living siphon. The cathedral fell into a deathly silence. Even the high priest lowered his staff. "He is a leech," a voice shouted from the pews. "A fraud," another cried. "Look at her." I ripped the silk bodice of my gown just enough to reveal the jagged, glowing scar over my heart. Under the influence of the dark corona, the scar wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a map of his crimes, pulsing with a vengeful violet light. "You called me tainted because I wasn't enough of a slave for you anymore," I whispered, leaning close to his ear as he collapsed to his knees, his golden aura flickering out like a dying candle. "But look at me now. I am the very thing that will swallow your son." I reached for the crown in his shaking hands. As my fingers touched the gold, the metal groaned. The holy gems shattered, replaced by shards of obsidian that grew from the frame like thorns. I didn't put it on my head. I crushed it. "I don't want your crown," I said, letting the gold dust fall onto his bowed head. "I want your ruin." From the rafters, Silas dropped down, landing beside me with a sound like a thunderclap. He didn't look like a man, he looked like the end of the world. He placed a heavy, possessive hand on my shoulder, his amethyst eyes scanning the terrified crowd. "The light has failed you," Silas's voice boomed, vibrating in the chests of every person in the room. "The abyss is here to collect the debt." He looked at me, a dark, wicked pride in his gaze. "Shall we burn the rest of it down, my queen?" I looked at Cassius, who was sobbing in the dirt of his own altar, and then at the empire that had cheered for my execution. "No," I said, a cruel smile touching my lips. "Burning is too fast. I want them to live in the dark and remember my name every time they try to find the sun." I turned to the crowd, my shadow wolf letting out a howl that shattered every remaining window in the cathedral. "The age of dawn is over," I declared. "The eclipse has begun." The silence that followed the fall of the sun god's cathedral was heavier than any scream. Aethelgard was a city of ghosts now. The golden banners that once snapped in the wind were charred rags, and the citizens spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the sky every time a cloud blocked the sun, fearing the leathery sweep of Silas' wings. We didn't take the gilded palace. It smelled too much of Cassius' desperation and Alara' glowing perfume. Instead, we retreated to the citadel of Blackrock, a fortress of basalt and iron that sat on the jagged northern cliffs, overlooking the very abyss where I had found my salvation. I sat on a throne of cold iron, my fingers tracing the silver markings on my throat. They were pulsing with a soft, rhythmic mythist light. You look like a queen who has conquered the world, only to realize it's made of sand, Silas' voice echoed from the shadows of the high rafters. He dropped down, landing with the silent lethalness of a predator. He was shirtless, his dark skin covered in ancient, glowing runes that mirrored my own. I didn't realize how much of their loyalty was just cowardice, I said, looking at the stack of fealty pledges from dukes and counts who, only a week ago, were calling for my head. They don't love the light, and they don't love the dark. They only love the hand that isn't currently crushing their throats. Silas walked toward me, his presence a gravitational force. He stopped between my knees, leaning over the armrests of the throne until his face was inches from mine. "That is the nature of the flock, Seraphina," he murmured, his breath smelling of dark wine and smoke. "They need a shepherd. The only question is whether the shepherd uses a crook or a blade." He reached out, his thumb brushing my lower lip. The contact was a jolt of pure energy, but beneath it, I felt a shuddering chill. The dark corona was powerful, but it was cold. It didn't warm the blood like the solar flame, it consumed the heat of the host to fuel its violet brilliance. I was shivering, though the room was lit by a dozen braziers. "You're freezing," Silas noted, his brow furrowing. "It's a small price to pay," I replied, trying to pull away, but he didn't let me. In one smooth motion, he hauled me off the throne and into his arms. I gasped, my hands instinctively clutching his shoulders. He was like a furnace. His magic, the raw, ancient power of the abyss, didn't just warm my skin, it seeped into my bones, quieting the ravenous hunger of the dark corona. "Don't be a martyr, little bird," he growled against my ear, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "You are my mate now, whether the heavens recognize it or not. My strength is your hearth." "Why are you doing this, Silas?" I whispered, my forehead leaning against his neck. "You're the Forbidden King. You could have walked out of that abyss and burned the whole continent to a cinder. Why stay with a damaged priestess?" Silas grew still. He carried me to a large fur rug before the fireplace, sitting down with me in his lap, his massive arms wrapping around me like iron bands. "Because you weren't the first thorn to jump into that abyss," he said, his voice heavy with a secret 100 years old. "A century ago, it was your great-grandmother, Queen Valerica, who forged the chains that bound me. She didn't do it out of justice. She did it because I refused to be her pet. She stole my heart literally and hid it within the thorn bloodline." My heart stuttered. "What?" "The reason you were able to awaken me, the reason our powers call to one another like dying stars." Silas's eyes burned with a fierce, possessive light. "It's because for 100 years, my heart has been beating inside your ancestors. When Cassius ripped out your solar flame, he accidentally broke the seal. He thought he was destroying you, but he was actually returning my heart to me through the only person I've ever seen as an equal." The revelation was a thunderclap. I wasn't just a host for darkness, I was the guardian of the Forbidden King's soul. "So you need me to live," I said, searching his face. "If I die, your heart dies." Silas's grip tight until it was almost painful. "If you die, Seraphina, I will tear the sky down until there is nothing left but silence. It's not about the heart anymore. It's about the woman who chose the monster." He leaned down, his kiss desperate and hungry, a collision of teeth and shadow. I responded with a ferocity that surprised us both, my black fire twining with his amethyst sparks. But the moment was shattered. The heavy iron doors of the throne room groaned open. A figure stood there, draped in a tattered golden cloak that had seen better days. He was old, his skin like parchment, but his eyes bright, cold blue, were unmistakably royal. Old King Valories, Kesh's father, the man who was supposed to have died in the Great Cleansing 5 years ago. A touching reunion, the old king rasped, leaning on a staff made of white ash. But I'm afraid the heart Silas speaks of isn't a gift, Seraphina. It's a ticking clock. Silas stood up, pulling me behind him, his shadow wings unfurling in a display of lethal aggression. Valories, I should have finished you when I had the chance. Perhaps, the old king smiled a toothless grimace. But then you wouldn't know the truth. The Thorn bloodline doesn't just hold your heart, Silas. It consumes it. Every time Seraphina uses that dark corona, she isn't using her magic. She's burning through your life force. By the time she takes her revenge on my son, she will have hollowed you out until you're nothing but a shell. I looked at Silas, my heart racing. He didn't look back. He didn't deny it. Is it true? I whispered. Silas didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the king, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might shatter. The choice is yours, little bird, the old king chuckled. Save the king and remain a slave to your own weakness, or consume him and become the god queen of a world in ashes. Either way, my son's blood will be the least of your worries. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like physical weight. I looked at the man who had saved me, then at the power burning in my veins. The game hadn't ended at the cathedral. It had only just begun. The cold within me wasn't just a physical chill anymore, it was a moral frost. Every time I breathed, I felt the rhythmic thrum of Silas's heart in the back of my mind. It was a deep, resonating bassdrum that had beaten for eons. And now, according to the old king, I was the silence that was coming for it. I stood on the balcony of Black Rock, watching the amethyst Dororus dance over the abyss. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of my cloak, hidden so Silas couldn't see the way the dark corona was leaking from my fingertips in wisps of violet smoke. I was hungry. Not for food, but for him. You're thinking too loud again, a voice rumbled behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Silas's presence was a predatory heat that usually brought me comfort, but now it felt like an indictment. Go away, Silas, I whispered, my voice cracking like thin ice. No, he was there, a mountain of shadow and muscle, caging me against the stone railing. He didn't touch me, but the air between us crackled with the static of our combined magic. Valories is a snake, Seraphina. He planted a seed of doubt in your head because he knew it was the only weapon that could stop you, Silas murmured, his head dipping low, his lips grazing the shell of my ear. Is he lying? I snapped, finally spinning around to face him. My amethyst eyes were wild, flickering with the black fire I was trying so hard to suppress. Tell me HES lying, Silas. Tell me that every time I strike down a solar knight, I'm not tearing a piece of your soul away. Silas looked down at me, his expression unreadable. He reached out, grabbing my wrists with a grip that was both possessive and desperate. It doesn't matter, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. It matters to me, I screamed, struggling against him. I spent 10 years being a parasite for Cassius. I won't be one for you. I won't hollow you out until you're nothing but a memory in a history book. You are not a parasite, Silas roared, the force of his voice causing the stone balcony to shudder. He slammed my back against the pillar, his face inches from mine, his eyes burning with a violent, terrifying purple light. You are the reason I want to live. Do you think I sat in that abyss for a century because I couldn't break those chains? I waited because there was nothing on the surface worth returning to. Until you fell. He released my wrists and grabbed my face, his thumbs digging into my cheeks. If my life is the fuel for your fire, then let me burn, he hissed, his mouth hovering just over mine. I would rather be ash in your hands than a king in a world without you. Do you understand me, Seraphina? Don't you dare try to be noble with me. Don't you dare try to protect me by becoming weak again. "I can't, I love you too much to kill you," I sobbed, my resolve crumbling under the sheer gravity of his devotion. "Then kill them instead," Silas replied, his kiss hitting me like a physical blow. It was a collision of souls, raw and devastating. As our mouths met, the dark corona exploded. It didn't care about my guilt, it only cared about its king. I felt the surge of power, Silas's power, flooding into me, mending my frayed nerves and setting my blood on fire. But as the pleasure peaked, a scream echoed through the bond, not from Silas, but from the earth itself. Miles away, at the border of the whispering woods, the sky was turning a sickly, artificial yellow. I pulled away, gasping, my silver hair glowing with a frantic light. "Cassius." "H.E.S. harvesting," Silas growled, looking toward the horizon. Through our shared consciousness, we saw it. Cassius wasn't hiding in a cave. He had taken over the border village of Oakhaven. He was standing in the town square, surrounded by the old king's dark acolytes. He wasn't using solar flame anymore. He was using a forbidden soul siphon, a ritual that turned the life essence of innocent villagers into a crude, violent version of the light. He was building an army of husks. "H.E.S. trying to draw us out," I said, my heart turning to lead. "He knows if I come to stop him, he'll have to use the corona. He knows they'll be killing you to save them." "A clever trap," Silas noted, his wings unfurling with a sound like a thunderclap. The shadows around him began to solidify into armor. But he forgot one thing. "What?" I asked, looking up at him. Silas reached into his own chest, his hand disappearing into a cloud of amethyst mist. He pulled out a jagged shard of obsidian, a fragment of his original heart that had never been stolen. He pressed it into my palm, the stone sinking into my skin until it rested right over my own heart. He forgot that a king doesn't just provide the fuel. Silas smiled, a dark, lethal expression that made my wolf howl with pride. He provides the spark. "Go to Oakhaven, Seraphina. Show him that a queen of ash doesn't need to ask for permission to end a world." "And you?" I asked, fear clawing at my throat. "I'll be the one holding the sky so it doesn't fall while you work," Silas replied, his eyes softening for only a heartbeat. "Go be the nightmare he deserves." I didn't need a horse. I didn't need a carriage. I shifted my dread as I leapt from the balcony, my massive silver-black wolf form tearing through the clouds. Below me, Silas let out a roar that shook the foundations of the empire, a sound of absolute, unconditional support. I reached Oakhaven in an hour. The village was a graveyard of the living. People wandered the streets with hollow eyes, their souls being dragged toward the center of town where Cassius stood, looking more like a demon than Silas ever had. He looked up as I landed, a sickeningly familiar smirk on his face. "There she is," Cassius called out, his voice distorted by the stolen souls he had consumed. "The woman who would rather kill her lover than save these people. Tell me, Seraphina, how much of the Forbidden King is left after that little run from the palace?" I stood in the center of the road, my fur bristling with violet electricity. I didn't shift back to human. I didn't need to. My wolf's voice echoed in his mind, cold and final. "More than enough to watch you die, Cassius." The battle didn't start with a sword. It started with an eclipse. I opened my jaws, and for the first time, I didn't just howl. I breathed. The dark corona poured from my throat, a river of violet black fire that didn't just burn the hux, it severed the connections Cassius had made. I felt Silas's strength draining, felt the shard in my chest pulse with a frantic, dying heat. Every blast of fire was a year of his life. Every shield I raised was a piece of his soul. I was killing the man I loved to stop the man I hated. And as Cassius laughed, drawing more power from the dying villagers, I realized the old king was right. But he was also wrong. Because Silas wasn't just my fuel. He was my reason. I let out a roar that shattered the windows of every house in Oakhaven, my eyes turning a blinding, incandescent violet. "If I have to burn him to ash to end you," I projected, the ground cracking beneath my paws, "then I will make sure the ash is beautiful enough to choke you to death." The final collision began. The air in Oakhaven didn't just burn, it disintegrates. The sky above the border village was a chaotic canvas of bruised purple electricity and the sickly, artificial gold of Cassius's siphon light. I was no longer a woman. I was a storm of silver-black fur and blinding violet rage, my massive wolf jaws tearing through the husks that Cassius summoned. But with every roar, with every blast of the dark corona that erupted from my throat, a phantom thread tight and around my heart. Thump. A year of his life. Thump, thump. A decade of his soul. I could feel him. Miles away in Blackrock, Silas was wasting away. His vibrant tectonic heartbeat was fading into a frantic, papery tremor. It wasn't just a physical toll, it was a soul-flaying agony that echoed through our bond, a high-pitched scream of a star being swallowed by a black hole. "You're killing him, Safina." Cassius laughed, his voice a choir of distorted, stolen souls. He stood on the roof of the town's burning chapel, looking like a demonic god in his crown of false light. "With every swipe of your claws, you're driving a dagger into your forbidden king's chest. How does it feel to be a parasite for the monster you love?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My wolf's mind was a single, devastating thought: end him. I lunged, a comet of midnight and shadow. I hit Cassius with bone-crushing force, sending us tumbling through the chapel's roof and into the sanctuary below. We crashed into the altar, scattering sacred icons and ancient relics. We shifted mid-tumble, our human forms bruised and bleeding on the cold marble floor. Cassius was fast. Stolen magic was a drug that gave him terrifying speed. He grabbed me by the throat, hoisting me off the ground, his eyes burning with a violent, unstable golden light. "Valeri Cass, descendant, a traitor to the light, a monster lover," he spat, his fingers digging into my windpipe, his nails drawing blood. "You thought you could crash my wedding, Serafina. You thought you could make me regret the day I rejected you. But look at you now. You're dying. And the king is dying. And all these pathetic people you tried to save, they're already gone." Through the shattered stained glass windows, I saw the villagers of Oak Haven. They weren't fighting anymore. They were walking towards us with hollow eyes, their life force being siphoned away by Cassius's ritual. They were husks, their souls fueling the man who was strangling me. "No, this is too much. I can't win." A wave of crushing despair washed through me, threatening to extinguish the dark corona. The shard in my chest, the fragment of Silas's heart, went cold. And then a thought echoed through the bond. It wasn't a word. It was a memory. I saw a young Silas a century ago, jumping into the abyss, not because he was forced, but because he was lonely. I saw the night I fell into his pool of veils, and the moment he realized I was Valeri Cass' child. I felt the surge of his protective love, the same love that had made him tell me on the balcony, "If my life is the fuel for your fire, then let me burn." He wasn't a parasite. He was a partner. And a partner doesn't just let you burn. They burn with you. Silas's mental voice roared through the bond, shifting from the tremor of a dying man to the rumble of a volcano. "They called us forbidden, Serafina. They called us damaged. They called our love a symphony of ruin. Let them hear the final movement." Miles away, at Blackrock's citadel, Silas let out a howl that wasn't a cry of pain, it was a declaration of total surrender. I felt him. I felt the moment he let go. He didn't just provide the fuel, he became the spark. He ignited his own core, his own forbidden soul, and poured every last drop of his eon-souled magic into the bond. It wasn't a transition. It was an explosion. My heart stuttered, then stopped. Not in death, but in metamorphosis. The dark corona, the limited, violet fire I had been using, was consumed. In its place, a new kind of power awakened, a power that didn't ask for permission, didn't need fuel, didn't burn. It simply unmade. The void fire. The forbidden power of the abyss, now complete and unstable within a mortal frame. My eyes didn't ignite, they became pure, incandescent amethyst, like a nebula collapsing inward. The silver markings on my skin flared until they were blinding, consuming the rags of my midnight silk gown. Cassius gasped, recoiling as if I had suddenly turned into a literal black hole. What have you done?" he whispered, his golden aura sputtering and dying in the cold light of my transformation. I stood up, my body humming with a force that made the chapel floor crack beneath my feet. I didn't reach for him with hands or claws. I reached with my soul. I didn't lunge. I walked. Every step was a seismic shift. Cassius tried to flee, tried to summon his husks, tried to fire one last pathetic bolt of stolen solar flame. I didn't even raise my hand to defend myself. The golden bolt hit me and simply vanished, swallowed by the insatiable void surrounding my body. "For the chains you forged," I said, my voice a requiem of 1,000 wolves, vibrating with a divine, terrifying authority. "For the heart you stole," I took another step. "For the woman you rejected." Cassius was on his knees now, his eyes wide with a realization that came a century too late. He looked at the girl he had called damaged goods, and for the first time, he saw the face of the God Queen who was going to erase him. I didn't use a spell. I simply touched his forehead with a single finger. The void fire surged. Cassius didn't scream. He didn't burn. There was no smoke, no ash. He simply ceased to exist. His body, his crown, his false light, all of it was vaporized in a single, silent shockwave of amethyst energy. The stolen souls he had consumed were liberated, rising toward the darkened sky in a silent choir of gratitude. But I didn't look at his Arasur. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The black wolf inside me was howling not in victory but in devastating realization. I was powerful. I was complete. I had won. And I was completely, absolutely alone. The shard in my chest was gone. The rhythmic bass of Silas's heart in the back of my mind had gone silent. He had kept his promise. He had held the sky so I could work. And in doing so, he had become the ash I had promised Cassius would choke on. I fell to my knees in the dust of the chapel, the magnificent, devastating power of the void fire humming like a requiem in my veins. "Silas," I whispered, my voice a jagged shard that died in the empty air. The world didn't end with a bang, it ended with a whisper of falling ash. I stood in the center of the ruined chapel, the void fire hum in my veins slowly receding into a heavy, aching silence. The villagers of Oakhaven, those who had survived the siphoning, watched me from a distance. They didn't cheer for their savior. They knelt in the dirt, their eyes wide with a terror that I understood all too well. I wasn't their goddess of dawn anymore. I was the eclipse they would tell stories about to keep their children from wandering into the dark. "Seraphina," a voice called out, weak and trembling. I turned. Leilani stood at the edge of the debris, her face pale, her eyes searching mine for a flicker of the sister she used to know. "She-'s gone, isn't he?" she whispered, looking at the empty space beside me where Silas should have been. I didn't answer. I couldn't find the words in a language that felt too small for the grief I was carrying. I felt like a hollowed-out mountain, grand and imposing on the outside, but filled with nothing but cold, stagnant terror. "He is not gone," my wolf growled in the back of my mind, her voice a low, vibrating snarl of defiance. "He is us. We are him. The king does not die, he merely changes shape." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Silas hadn't just given me his magic, he had poured his very essence into the bond. If the void fire was alive within me, then the spark of Silas, the raw, unyielding consciousness of the forbidden king, was still there, buried beneath the layers of power and pain. I didn't stay to lead the reconstruction. I didn't stay to hear the pleas of the council. I shifted into my massive silver-black form and ran. I ran until the air grew thin and the scent of ozone and ancient earth returned. I ran until I reached the edge of the abyss, the jagged scar where my life had truly begun. The Black Rock Citadel was silent. The guards bowed their heads as I passed, sensing the devastating gravity of the queen who walked among them. I went straight to the throne room, to the fur rug where he had once held me and promised that I was his equal. "You told me to be a demon, Silas," I whispered to the empty room, my voice echoing off the basalt pillars. "You told me to burn the world down if I had to, but you forgot to tell me how to breathe in the smoke without you." I looked at my hands. The silver markings were no longer just glowing, they were bleeding a faint amethyst light. The void fire was unstable. Without Silas to balance the dark, the power would eventually consume me, turning me into a literal black hole that would swallow a Ethelgard whole. A ticking clock, I recalled the old king's words. Well, if the clock was ticking, I was going to use every second to rewrite the ending. I walked to the pool of veils. The liquid shadow was still, reflecting a sky that was no longer gold but a deep, bruised violet. I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the water, the coldness a familiar embrace. I dived. Deep within the liquid shadow, where the pressure was enough to crush a mortal's lungs, I opened my soul. I didn't call for the corona. I didn't call for the void fire. I called for him. Silas, I projected, the mental scream shattering the silence of the deep. I am the vessel. I am the hearth, come back to the fire you started. For a long time there was nothing but the crushing weight of the dark. And then, a flicker. A tiny, jagged spark of amethyst light at the very bottom of the pool. It was a shard of a shattered soul, memory of a growl, the scent of rain on hot pavement, the feeling of scarred fingers against my jaw. I reached for it, wrapping my own fading life for surround the spark. I felt the void fire within me scream in protest, trying to consume the last of Silas' essence to fuel its own hunger. No, I gasped, my lungs burning as I forced my own magic to bend. You will not take him. You will be him. I pulled the spark into my chest, right where the shard of obsidian had been. I didn't just embrace it, I grafted it to my own heart. I offered my blood, my years, my very breath to reconstruct the man who had sacrificed everything for me. The pool of veils erupted. A pillar of violet black light shot from the depths of the abyss, piercing the clouds and illuminating the continent for hundreds of miles. In the center of the maelstrom, I felt a hand grab mine. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Solid. Heavy. Hot, we broke the surface together, gasping for air that tasted of rebirth. Silas was there. He looked different, his dark skin was now etched with silver runes that matched my own, and his amethyst eyes held a depth of ancient wisdom that was no longer burdened by the chains of the past. He was no longer the forbidden king of the abyss. He was the consort of the void. Yuri a fool. Sari a fool. Seraphina thorn, he gasped, his voice a low, familiar rumble as he hauled me onto the obsidian shore. You almost hollowed yourself out to find me. I'm a queen, I replied, my breath hitching as I touched his face, tracing the familiar lines of his jaw. And a queen always collects her debts. You owed me a lifetime, Silas. Silas laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed through the abyss. He pulled me into a kiss that tasted of starlight and shadow, a collision of two souls that were no longer separate, but woven into a single unbreakable symphony. 6 months had passed since the eclipse of Ethelgard. The Empire was no longer a land of golden lies. Under the rule of the Void Queen, the very climate of the continent had shifted. The sun still rose, but its light was filtered through a permanent, shimmering violet haze, a gentle twilight that protected the earth from the scorching arrogance of the old solar regime. Blackrock's Citadel had become the new capital. It was a city of stone and starlight, where the discarded and the damaged found a home. The Thorn bloodline wasn't purged, it was evolved. I stood on the balcony of the Great Hall, wearing a crown made of raw obsidian and starlight. My hand rested on the slight swell of my belly, a child born of the void and the abyss. A bridge between two worlds. The delegates from the Southern Isles have arrived, Silas said, stepping out from the shadows. He wore a simple black tunic, his silver markings glowing softly in the twilight. He looked at my stomach, his expression one of fierce, protective reverence. They brought gifts of moon silk and pearls. They want to know if the queen is ready to negotiate the trade routes. The queen is busy, I murmured, leaning back against his chest. Tell them to wait. The night is young. Silas wrapped his arms around me, his heat a constant, comforting hearth. The void fire within me was quiet, balanced by his presence. We weren't saints. We weren't heroes. We were the monsters that the world needed to keep the false gods away. Far to the south, the ruins of the Sun God's cathedral had been turned into a monument, a reminder of the prince who had tried to steal a soul and ended up as ash. They said that on quiet nights, you could still hear the ghost of a golden howl, mourning a fate that was lost to pride. But I didn't listen to ghosts. I looked up at the sky where the amethyst auroras were beginning to dance. "Do you ever miss the light, Seraphina?" Silas asked, his chin resting on my shoulder. I looked at the man who had seen me when I was invisible, who had valued me when I was worthless, and who had burned his own soul to keep me warm. "No," I said, a clear, certain smile touching my lips. "The light only showed me what I was supposed to be. The dark showed me who I am." I lifted my muzzle to the violet moon and let out a howl-lot-roo, powerful sound of completion and triumph. Beside me, the king joined in. The symphony of ruin was over. The song of the void had just begun. This chronicle proves that a sovereign's true power and a genuine soul bond isn't forged in the hollow light of old cathedrals or the arrogant bloodlines of the past. It is defined by the purity of the void fire and the sheer magnitude of what a queen is willing to incinerate to protect a heart that was once lost in the abyss. Cassius and Delara clung to the dying embers of a stolen sun, but Seraphina possessed the shimmering violet darkness that finally burned away their lies. If you were captivated by this emotional odyssey of ancient shadow, forbidden heat, and all of that redefined an empire, please give this story a massive thumbs up. Your support is the fuel that keeps this channel's darkness burning and lets me know you crave more high-stakes, soul-shattering romances like the legend of the Eclipse Queen. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I have another heart-connecting supernatural romance coming next week involving a rejected, broken Omega and a ruthless, secret billionaire like an alpha who will stop at nothing to reclaim the mate he once cast aside. You absolutely do not want to miss it. It's going to be a wild ride from the very first breath. What was your favorite moment in today's epic tale? Was it the breathtaking moment Seraphina shattered the solar altar with a single touch, or the legendary sacrifice when she dived into the pool of veils to pull Silas back from the brink of extinction? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your theories on the Void Fire bloodline. Until next time, stay fierce, stay wild, and I'll see you in the next chapter of the dark.